The fake marriage contract lay untouched on the table. No one cared about it anymore. 300 of the most powerful people in New York stood in complete silence as Adrian DeLuca slowly removed the DeLuca family signet ring from his finger. His uncle stepped forward. "Adrian, don't do this." Across the ballroom, Isabella Romano's perfect smile finally cracked. Emma instinctively took one step back, tears shimmering in her eyes. "This wasn't our agreement," she whispered. Adrian never looked away from her. He gently took her trembling hand and slid the centuries-old ring onto her finger. Then he turned toward the room. "Tonight, she came here pretending to be my wife." Silence stretched across the ballroom. "But every person standing here has now witnessed something none of you expected." Another pause. "The only person worthy of carrying the DeLuca name was never born into your world." No applause followed. Only disbelief, because everyone suddenly realized the fake dinner had just become the opening battle of a war no one had prepared for. Earlier that morning, Emma Brooks sat alone in a quiet conference room on the 32nd floor of a Manhattan office tower, watching another board celebrate a turnaround she had engineered. The CEO accepted congratulations. The investors praised his vision. The executives congratulated one another over champagne. No one mentioned the woman whose strategy had rescued a company from collapse. Emma simply closed her notebook. She had long ago stopped expecting recognition. For 12 years, she had quietly built a career rescuing businesses that everyone else had already written off. She could read financial statements the way musicians read sheet music. More importantly, she could read people. Fear, pride, greed, wide, desperation. Most negotiations failed long before anyone discussed money. They failed because people misunderstood each other's motivations. Emma rarely did. Ironically, that extraordinary ability made her nearly invisible. At 5'7", with a soft figure she had spent years learning to embrace, Emma had grown accustomed to entering rooms where strangers underestimated her before she spoke. Some assumed she lacked authority. Others mistook kindness for weakness. A few dismissed her entirely. She no longer wasted energy correcting first impressions. Experience had taught her something more valuable. People revealed themselves fastest when they believed she wasn't a threat. Her phone vibrated. An unfamiliar number. "I was told you're the only consultant in New York who can survive impossible negotiations." The voice was calm. Controlled. Powerful enough that it didn't need to become louder. Emma smiled politely. "I've survived quite a few. I need someone who can survive one more." She checked her watch. "I normally require more information before accepting a client. You'll have it in 30 minutes. The line disconnected. No sales pitch. No explanation. Just certainty. Curiosity won. Across Manhattan, Adrian DeLuca stood alone in the library of the DeLuca estate. The mansion had belonged to his family for nearly a century. The portraits lining the walls watched him with silent judgment. His grandfather had built an empire through intimidation. His father had transformed much of that empire into legitimate businesses spanning logistics, luxury real estate, shipping, hospitality, and international investments. Adrian intended to finish what they had started. Tonight's diplomatic dinner would determine whether the DeLuca Group secured its largest international partnership in company history. The merger would distance the family even further from its notorious reputation and secure thousands of jobs across multiple countries. Failure wasn't an option. Unfortunately, neither was appearing alone. Many of the investors represented old families who valued image as much as financial performance. A stable family life projected stability in business. An unmarried man carrying the DeLuca name invited unnecessary questions. His engagement to Isabella Romano had ended 6 months earlier. Officially, they had cited irreconcilable differences. Privately, Adrian had realized Isabella loved influence far more than partnership. Ending the engagement had cost him politically. Tonight would reopen every rumor. His chief advisor entered. "They're expecting Mrs. DeLuca." "There isn't one. There needs to appear to be." Adrian looked out the library window. "I won't marry someone for appearances. I'm not asking you to." A thin folder landed on the desk. Inside sat one profile. Emma Brooks, corporate strategist, negotiation specialist. No scandals. No media presence. No political affiliations. An impeccable professional reputation. Why her? Because every executive who tried to manipulate her failed. And because every executive who underestimated her regretted it. For the first time that morning, Adrian looked interested. Emma arrived precisely on time. The DeLuca estate was less intimidating than she had imagined. It wasn't loud. It didn't advertise wealth. Its confidence rested in understatement. A butler escorted her into Adrian's private study. He stood as she entered. Tailored charcoal suit. Measured posture. The kind of presence that made people instinctively straighten their backs. He offered his hand. "Miss Brooks. Mr. DeLuca." Neither attempted small talk. "I'll be direct," Adrian said. "I need someone to accompany me to tonight's diplomatic dinner. As your consultant." "As my wife." Silence. Emma blinked once. "I assume that's not your opening attempt at humor." "It isn't." He slid a contract across the desk. "A temporary legal arrangement." She read every page. One evening. One public appearance. Confidentiality. Professional compensation. Automatic termination at midnight. No further obligations. Emma looked up. "Why would a man in your position ask a complete stranger?" "Because everyone in my world already has an agenda. And you believe I don't. I believe your reputation suggests you solve problems instead of creating them." She considered him carefully. "What if someone insults me?" "They probably will." "What if they insult you?" "I've heard worse." "What if they try to embarrass us?" "They definitely will." Emma leaned back. "So your expectation is that I smile through an evening specifically designed to destroy my credibility?" "No." Adrian met her eyes without hesitation. "My expectation is that you survive it." For reasons she couldn't quite explain, that answer felt honest. Not flattering. Honest. She signed. Adrian added his signature beneath hers. "The contract expires at midnight." Emma closed the folder. "Good. The moment this evening ends, we become strangers again," she finished. Exactly. Neither noticed the irony, because both believed those would be the easiest words either of them would say that day. 3 hours later, Emma stood before a mirror inside a guest suite overlooking the DeLuca Gardens. She wore an elegant midnight blue gown, selected by the estate's stylist. Minimal jewelry, soft makeup, nothing designed to disguise who she was. Only to allow her confidence to be seen before anyone noticed her appearance. A house attendant smiled warmly. "You look beautiful." Emma returned the smile. "I only need to look convincing." Outside, engines purred to life. Luxury vehicles began arriving, one after another, through the estate gates. The most influential families in New York were already gathering. Emma took one steady breath, then another. She had negotiated billion-dollar restructurings. She had calmed furious CEOs. She had rebuilt collapsing corporations. Yet somehow, walking downstairs to pretend to be Adrian DeLuca's wife felt like the most dangerous negotiation of her entire career. By 6:30, the DeLuca estate no longer resembled a family home. It had transformed into a kingdom of polished marble, crystal chandeliers, and carefully rehearsed smiles. Luxury cars lined the circular driveway. Valets moved with military precision. Inside, a string quartet played softly, beneath conversations worth billions of dollars. Every guest belonged to a world where influence was inherited before it was earned. Emma quietly reminded herself of something she had learned years ago. Expensive rooms never intimidated her. Only dishonest people did. A house attendant opened the grand staircase doors. Mr. and Mrs. Adrian DeLuca. The announcement echoed across the ballroom. Hundreds of conversations stopped at once. Every head turned. Emma resisted the instinct to lower her eyes. Instead, she placed one calm hand lightly on Adrian's arm, not possessively, not nervously. Simply, naturally, exactly as they had practiced. For several long seconds, no one spoke. Then came the whispers. Who is she? That's not Isabella. She's unexpected. I thought Adrian had better taste. Emma heard every word. Years ago, those whispers would have hurt. Tonight, they became useful information. People always revealed their character before revealing their intentions. Adrian leaned closer without moving his lips. You don't have to answer anyone. Emma smiled faintly. I wasn't planning to. The first obstacle arrived less than 2 minutes later. A silver-haired gentleman approached, with the confidence of someone who believed his opinion carried the weight of law. Richard DeLuca, Adrian's uncle. The elder extended his hand toward Emma without warmth. So, he studied her openly. This is the wife I've heard nothing about. Emma accepted the handshake. I imagine surprises are difficult to schedule. A few nearby guests chuckled. Richard didn't. Our family values tradition. I'm sure it does. And tradition generally favors transparency. Emma nodded thoughtfully. So does good leadership. He narrowed his eyes. Meaning, if a leader introduces someone only when the moment truly matters, people tend to pay closer attention. For the first time in years, Richard found himself without an immediate reply. Emma hadn't challenged him. She had simply redirected the conversation. The surrounding guests exchanged quiet glances. Interesting. Before Richard could recover, another voice floated across the room. Adrian. Elegant. Smooth. Dangerously familiar. Isabella Romano approached, wearing a crimson gown that commanded attention before she spoke a single word. She embraced Adrian politely. Not affectionately. A performance for the audience. Then she turned toward Emma. Her smile was flawless. I've heard absolutely nothing about you. Emma returned the smile. Then tonight has already become productive for both of us. Several investors hid amused expressions. Isabella continued. What exactly do you do? I solve complicated problems. Really? Yes. What kind? Emma tilted her head slightly. The kind people don't recognize until they become expensive. One elderly banker laughed aloud. That's the truest thing I've heard all week. Isabella's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Cocktails were served. Groups naturally formed around familiar alliances. Emma noticed something almost immediately. No one asked genuine questions. Every conversation functioned as an interview, disguised as politeness. Where had she studied? Who were her parents? Which charities supported her? Which clubs accepted her membership? Every answer measured status, not character. Emma answered honestly. State university, middle-class upbringing, scholarships, work, no inherited fortune. No famous surname, no attempt to impress. Oddly enough, the honesty unsettled people more than any fabricated pedigree could have. One venture capitalist frowned. You don't seem embarrassed. About what? Not belonging to this circle. Emma sipped her sparkling water before answering. I've spent my career helping circles like this avoid very expensive mistakes. A nearby woman raised an eyebrow. So you've advised companies represented in this room? Emma smiled. A few. Which ones? I'm afraid confidentiality is one promise I don't break. The response carried no arrogance, only professionalism. Several executives exchanged subtle nods. Confidentiality. Now that they respected. Adrian watched everything from across the room. His original concern had been protecting Emma. Instead, something unexpected was happening. She didn't need rescuing. Every attempt to corner her somehow ended with the other person exposing their own insecurity. Without raising her voice, without humiliating anyone, without ever appearing defensive, his longtime advisor quietly joined him. You've noticed it. What? No one is talking about her appearance anymore. Adrian scanned the ballroom. The advisor was right. The conversation had shifted. Guests were now discussing her answers, her judgment, her composure, her intelligence. The room had begun measuring her by completely different standards, and Emma didn't seem aware she had changed the entire atmosphere. Unfortunately, someone else noticed. Across the ballroom, Isabella watched several influential investors laughing with Emma. That wasn't supposed to happen. Emma was supposed to become uncomfortable. She was supposed to feel out of place. She was supposed to make mistakes. Instead, people were listening. Isabella slowly approached one of the evening's most powerful financiers, Victor Harrington, the billionaire whose investment would determine whether Adrian's merger succeeded. She leaned close enough that only he could hear. If you really want to know whether she's pretending, Victor looked toward Emma. Test her where failure can't be hidden. What do you suggest? Isabella smiled. Seat her beside the people negotiating the merger. Victor's eyes brightened. If she's merely decoration, she'll collapse before the appetizers. And if she doesn't? For the first time that evening, Isabella hesitated. Because she hadn't considered that possibility. A butler struck a crystal glass. Ladies and gentlemen, dinner is served. Guests slowly moved toward the grand dining hall. Place cards waited beside immaculate silver settings. Emma found hers. She stopped walking, directly across from Victor Harrington, beside Adrian. At the very center of the negotiation table. This wasn't an accident. Someone wanted every word she spoke to be judged. Someone expected her to fail in front of the most powerful people in New York. Emma looked once toward Adrian. He quietly met her eyes. You can still leave. She smiled with complete calm. No. She gently pulled out her chair. If they're going to test me, they deserve my full attention. Around the table, several guests exchanged curious looks. None of them realized they were about to witness the first move in a battle that would decide far more than a business merger. Before the main course arrived, the first trap had already been set. The dining hall was breathtaking in the restrained way only old money could achieve. A table nearly 50 feet long stretched beneath crystal chandeliers that had illuminated 4 generations of DeLuca family negotiations. Every place setting gleamed with polished silver. Every wineglass reflected the candlelight. Every seat had been chosen with purpose. Emma understood immediately. No one here had been seated by coincidence. Victor Harrington occupied the chair directly across from Adrian. Emma sat beside Adrian. Isabella sat beside Victor. Richard DeLuca positioned himself at the opposite end of the table, where he could observe every exchange. It wasn't simply dinner. It was a chessboard. The first course arrived. Conversations began politely enough. Shipping routes, European markets, interest rates, trade policy. Emma listened more than she spoke. People often revealed more while trying to impress each other than during formal negotiations. Victor eventually turned toward her. Mrs. DeLuca. Emma smiled. Yes? I understand you work in corporate strategy. I do. For public companies. Mostly. He nodded slowly. Interesting. Then came the first trap. I've always believed strategy is little more than common sense, dressed in expensive language. Several guests looked toward Emma. Victor wasn't asking a question. He was issuing a challenge. Emma placed her fork down calmly. I agree. Victor blinked. You do? Good strategy usually is common sense. She smiled gently. The difficult part is convincing intelligent people to stop ignoring it. Soft laughter traveled around the table. Not mocking. Appreciative. Victor smiled, though not happily. Strike one had failed. The soup course arrived. Isabella decided subtlety had accomplished enough. She preferred precision. Turning toward Emma with effortless elegance, she asked loudly enough for half the table to hear, I'm curious. Which boarding school did you attend? Emma reached for her water. I didn't. Oh? I attended public school. A brief silence followed. And university? Columbia for Graduate Studies. Isabella tilted her head. Scholarship? Yes. How admirable. The compliment sounded strangely hollow. My family has supported the same private academy for almost 70 years. Emma nodded warmly. That must have changed many young lives. Isabella smiled. It certainly maintained important traditions. Emma's expression never changed. My mother used to say, traditions are strongest when they're generous enough to welcome people who weren't born into them. The words were spoken softly, without accusation, without sarcasm. Yet the meaning settled over the table like fresh snow. One elderly philanthropist quietly lifted his glass toward Emma. Your mother sounds like a remarkable woman. Emma smiled. She was. The main course had barely been served when Richard attempted something more dangerous. Emma, she looked toward him. You've built a respectable consulting career. Thank you. But surely you understand that running a family empire requires different abilities. I imagine it does. Our world depends upon legacy. Emma nodded. It depends upon trust. Richard frowned. The two are connected. Sometimes. And sometimes, she answered without hesitation. Sometimes, legacy gives people trust they haven't earned. The table became unusually quiet. Emma continued, before anyone could interrupt. And sometimes people spend decades earning trust because they weren't fortunate enough to inherit it. No one spoke. Not because the statement was controversial. Because everyone present knew it was true. Richard slowly leaned back. For the first time all evening, someone had challenged his worldview without challenging his authority. That required unusual confidence. Adrian remained almost entirely silent, exactly as planned. The evening had been designed to test his wife, yet each passing minute produced an unexpected result. The more people questioned Emma, the more impressive she became. Not because she defeated them, because she never tried to. She answered ideas, never attacked people. She protected everyone's dignity. Even those attempting to embarrass her. Adrian found himself studying her instead of the negotiations. That realization unsettled him. Emotions complicated decisions. He had built an empire by refusing to let them interfere. Emma was becoming interference. Dessert menus had just been distributed when Victor made his move. He opened a thick leather folder. Ladies and gentlemen, I believe we can discuss tomorrow's merger informally. Several executives immediately leaned forward. Charts appeared. Financial projections, acquisition structures, cross-border tax models. Emma quietly recognized something. This wasn't informal. The meeting everyone expected tomorrow had quietly begun tonight. Victor slid a document toward Adrian. My revised conditions. Adrian scanned the first page. His expression remained controlled. Too controlled. Emma noticed the slightest tightening of his jaw, a sign almost no one else would recognize. She looked down at the numbers only briefly, then back at Victor. He was smiling, not confidently. Patiently, like someone waiting for a trap to close. Emma said nothing. Not yet. She watched the others instead. Several investors seemed uncomfortable. One legal advisor avoided eye contact. Another executive repeatedly turned pages without reading them. The room wasn't reacting to the proposal. It was reacting to something hidden inside it. Victor finally asked, "Well?" Adrian answered evenly, "We'll review everything tomorrow." Victor smiled wider. "Of course. But perhaps your wife has an opinion." Dozens of eyes turned toward Emma. Isabella almost couldn't conceal her satisfaction. This was exactly where she wanted Emma. Surrounded by billion-dollar negotiations she couldn't possibly understand. Emma glanced once toward Adrian. He gave the smallest shake of his head. A warning. Don't get involved. She understood. She also understood something else. If no one challenged the document now, tomorrow's merger would already be lost. Emma folded her hands quietly on the table. "I do have one question." Victor leaned forward. "Please." Emma looked directly at him. "Before I ask, I'd like to confirm something. The exclusivity clause on page 14. She smiled politely. Was that oversight intentional? Victor's smile disappeared. Across the table, 3 corporate attorneys instinctively reached for the same page at exactly the same moment. No one had expected her to notice it, least of all the man who had written it. For the first time that evening, the people testing Emma realized they might be sitting across from the most dangerous negotiator in the room. The silence after Emma's question felt heavier than the crystal chandeliers above them. Victor Harrington didn't answer immediately. Instead, he smiled with practiced confidence. "I'm not sure I understand your concern." Emma nodded politely. "I thought that might be the case. She didn't touch the contract. She didn't need to. I've only glanced through it once, so please correct me if I'm mistaken." The attorneys around the table leaned forward. Emma continued. "The exclusivity clause appears to prevent the DeLuca Group from partnering with any logistics company outside your investment network for 7 years." Victor folded his hands. "That's standard protection." "It might be." Emma's voice remained calm. "But that's not the interesting part." She looked around the table rather than at Victor. "The interesting part is how the definition of partnership changes 2 pages later." Several executives frowned and hurriedly flipped through the document. One attorney suddenly stopped. His expression changed. Emma noticed. So did Adrian. She continued softly. "If the language remains as written, almost every future expansion, even minority investments, technology partnerships, and regional distribution agreements, could require approval from Mr. Harrington's board." No one spoke. Emma wasn't raising her voice. She wasn't accusing anyone. She was simply reading what everyone else had overlooked. Victor finally laughed. "I admire your imagination." Emma smiled. "I prefer precision." She turned toward one of the attorneys. "Would you mind reading the final sentence under subsection C?" The attorney adjusted his glasses. His voice grew quieter with every word. "Including any future commercial relationship deemed materially related to transportation, logistics infrastructure, supply chain technology, or affiliated investment entities." He stopped reading. The room understood. A murmur spread through the table. Someone whispered, "That isn't exclusivity. It's control." Victor leaned back. "I expected experienced negotiators." His eyes settled on Emma. "I wasn't told I'd be negotiating with one," Emma answered gently. "You're not. I'm simply making sure everyone understands the same document." Across the table, one European investor slowly closed his folder. "I wouldn't have signed that." Another executive nodded. "Neither would I." Richard DeLuca, who had questioned Emma all evening, quietly reread the contract himself. For the first time, he looked at her with something resembling respect. Victor wasn't finished. "If the clause concerns everyone so much," he said smoothly, "perhaps Mrs. DeLuca would like to suggest an alternative." The challenge hung in the air. Emma could have declined. She wasn't officially part of the negotiation. She wasn't even supposed to speak. Instead, she asked a question. "Mr. Harrington, what is your greatest concern?" Victor seemed surprised. "My concern?" "Yes. Every clause protects something. What is this one protecting?" He hesitated. Only briefly. "Stability." Emma nodded. "I believe you." The answer confused everyone. She wasn't attacking him. She was listening. Emma continued. "You've invested decades building predictable returns. You've watched partnerships collapse because one company suddenly changed direction. So you're trying to eliminate uncertainty." Victor looked at her carefully. "Go on. What you actually want isn't control. You want commitment." He didn't respond. His silence was enough. Emma turned another page. What if exclusivity lasted only during the initial integration period? 12 months. After that, new partnerships would remain possible, provided they didn't directly compete with existing joint operations. Several legal advisors immediately began making notes. Emma wasn't weakening the agreement. She was strengthening it. Both parties kept what truly mattered. No one became trapped. One investor whispered, "That's actually better." Another nodded. "It protects growth instead of restricting it." Within moments, people who had spent hours defending positions were discussing Emma's proposal instead. Not because she had won an argument, because she had identified the interests beneath the arguments. Adrian watched her in complete silence. This wasn't negotiation. It was leadership. She hadn't embarrassed Victor. She had given him a way to preserve his dignity. She hadn't exposed weakness. She had created a solution everyone could claim as a victory. He suddenly understood something about Emma Brooks. Most brilliant people wanted to prove they were right. Emma wanted everyone else to succeed. That made her infinitely more dangerous and infinitely more admirable. Dessert arrived unnoticed. No one cared. The conversation had transformed. Executives who had ignored Emma an hour earlier were now asking for her opinion. A Swiss banker requested her thoughts on international restructuring. A technology founder asked how she handled resistant leadership teams. An investment chair wanted to know whether she'd ever considered joining a Fortune 100 board. Emma answered each question with the same humility she had shown from the beginning. "I've learned that balance sheets tell you what happened," she smiled. "People tell you what will happen." Several guests quietly applauded the observation. Even Richard allowed himself the smallest smile. Across the room, Isabella watched everything unravel. This wasn't how the evening had been scripted. Emma wasn't supposed to become the center of the room. She was supposed to remain Adrian's temporary companion. Instead, people had stopped introducing her as his wife. Now they were saying something entirely different. "Ask Emma. What does Emma think? Emma probably sees something we've missed." The shift seemed subtle, but Isabella understood high society better than anyone. Titles could be borrowed. Respect could not. And somehow, in less than 3 hours, Emma Brooks had earned what many people spent entire lifetimes chasing, without asking for it, without demanding it, without even realizing it. Isabella tightened her grip around her wineglass. If she allowed the evening to continue, Emma wouldn't merely survive. She would leave with something Isabella had spent years trying to secure: the admiration of the De Luca family. And perhaps the heart of the one man Isabella still believed belonged to her. As coffee was served, Isabella quietly excused herself from the table. She wasn't retreating. She was preparing something far more dangerous, because subtle humiliation had failed. The next attack would happen in front of everyone, and this time, it wouldn't target Emma's intelligence. It would target the only thing no brilliant answer could completely protect: her heart. Coffee had just been served when the ballroom shifted from business to celebration. A jazz quartet replaced the string ensemble. Servers quietly cleared away the final dessert plates. Clusters of guests drifted toward the marble fireplace, where champagne waited beneath towering arrangements of white orchids. The billion-dollar negotiation had relaxed, or so it seemed. Emma welcomed the brief pause. She stepped onto the terrace overlooking the illuminated gardens, grateful for a few minutes of fresh air. The evening had demanded constant focus, not because people had challenged her intelligence, because every conversation required her to choose kindness over pride. She heard footsteps behind her. "You've had quite an evening." Emma turned. It was Richard DeLuca. For several seconds, neither spoke. Finally, the older man sighed. "I judged you before you opened your mouth." Emma smiled gently. "I noticed." "You aren't offended?" "I've learned that first impressions usually reveal more about the observer than the person being observed." Richard gave a quiet laugh. "My brother would have liked you." Emma lowered her eyes. "I appreciate that." Before either could continue, another voice interrupted. "Ladies and gentlemen." Isabella Romano stood beside the grand piano inside the ballroom, champagne glass raised elegantly above the crowd. "I hope you'll forgive one final toast." Conversations slowly faded. Nearly every guest turned toward her. Emma felt an unexpected uneasiness settle in her chest. Instinct whispered that this wasn't a toast. It was a performance. Isabella smiled, with effortless grace. "Tonight has certainly surprised us." Soft laughter echoed through the room. "We've witnessed remarkable negotiations." She glanced warmly toward Emma. "And we've all had the pleasure of meeting Adrian's unexpected bride." Several guests shifted uncomfortably. The tone sounded pleasant. The words did not. "I've been reflecting on something," Isabella continued. "Life has a curious way of rewarding ambition." She walked slowly across the ballroom. Some guests instinctively stepped aside. Others watched with growing concern. "I spent years preparing to become part of this family." She looked toward Adrian. "I studied their history, their traditions, their responsibilities." She smiled again. And then, her gaze settled on Emma. Someone appears out of nowhere. Silence. "I suppose miracles still happen." A few nervous chuckles emerged. Emma remained still. Isabella stopped only a few feet away. "Tell me, Emma, what was the arrangement?" Emma met her eyes calmly. "I'm not sure I understand." "The financial arrangement." The room froze. "I'm certain a woman with your professional reputation wouldn't accept an evening like this without generous compensation." No one breathed. There it was. Not an insult, an accusation, one carefully designed to sound reasonable. Isabella continued, before Emma could answer. "I actually admire honesty. If a wealthy man hired someone to play the perfect wife..." She shrugged lightly. "There's no shame in admitting it." The implication spread through the ballroom faster than any raised voice could have. Gold digger, actress, employee, pretender. Emma felt hundreds of eyes studying her, waiting, judging, searching for hesitation. She could defend herself. She could reveal the contract. She could explain everything. Instead, she quietly set her untouched champagne glass onto a nearby table. Then she answered. "I accepted a professional agreement." Every whisper stopped. Emma continued with complete composure. "I accepted it because I believed someone needed help. I intended to do my job. And when midnight arrived, I intended to leave." She smiled softly. "I don't believe kindness becomes less honorable simply because someone is paid for their expertise." Several guests slowly nodded. It was a thoughtful answer, but Isabella wasn't finished. She laughed gently. "But surely everyone understands." She turned toward the guests. "No woman agrees to pretend she's Mrs. DeLuca without hoping the pretending becomes permanent. The words landed like broken glass. Emma finally felt something tighten inside her heart, not because of the accusation, because she suddenly realized something far more painful. If Adrian remained silent, everyone would believe it. After all, the arrangement had been his idea. He owed her nothing beyond the contract. She looked toward him only once. His expression revealed nothing. The disciplined head of the DeLuca family stood exactly as he always had. Calm, controlled, unreadable. Emma lowered her eyes. Perhaps this was how the evening was always meant to end. Not with applause, with humiliation. She drew a slow breath. I think I should leave. She turned toward the staircase. One step, then another. The ballroom remained silent. No one tried to stop her. Not even Adrian. At least, not immediately. Halfway across the room, a single voice shattered the silence. Emma. She stopped, without turning around. Adrian walked forward slowly. Every footstep echoed through the ballroom. When he reached the center of the room, he faced the guests instead of Emma. Then he spoke. There's something every person here deserves to know. Isabella smiled. She believed she had won. She had no idea. Adrian was about to destroy not only her accusation, but the carefully constructed image she had spent years protecting. The next words spoken inside the DeLuca estate would change Emma's life forever. Emma stopped walking. The ballroom became so quiet that the crackling fire in the marble fireplace sounded almost deafening. She didn't turn around. She wasn't sure she wanted to. Hope was a dangerous thing, especially after spending years teaching herself not to expect anyone to choose her. Behind her, Adrian spoke with the same calm authority that had built one of New York's most respected business empires. Tonight, many of you have formed opinions about Emma Brooks. His eyes swept across the room. Some of those opinions are deserved. A ripple of confusion moved through the guests. And some of them are completely wrong. He reached inside his jacket. Several people instinctively assumed he was retrieving the contract. Instead, he removed a folded cashier's check. This, he held it high enough for everyone to see, was the original payment I offered Emma. Curiosity spread across the room. It represented more money than many people earn in several years. Emma slowly turned. She hadn't expected to see that check again. Adrian continued. She read the contract. She accepted the assignment. Then she pushed this check back across the table. Every face in the ballroom fixed on him. Do you know what she said? No one answered. If I accept this amount, he looked directly at Emma. You'll spend the evening wondering whether every smile has a price. Emma closed her eyes for a moment. She remembered. She had almost forgotten those words herself. So she crossed out the number. He unfolded the check. The amount she accepted barely covered the consulting fee she would normally charge for canceling an existing client. Gasps quietly rippled through the room. She refused luxury gifts. She refused jewelry. She refused an apartment. She refused every unnecessary privilege my advisors suggested. His voice remained steady. The only thing she requested was the freedom to leave at midnight without anyone trying to change the agreement. Across the room, Isabella's expression began to crack. No. She stepped forward. That proves nothing. Adrian turned toward her. No? You think she's manipulating everyone? I think she's manipulating you. Adrian nodded once. I did too. The admission startled everyone. I trusted contracts more than character. I believed clear terms could control uncertain outcomes. He smiled faintly. I was wrong. He looked around the ballroom. Every person here watched Emma tonight. Not one of you saw her interrupt anyone. Not one of you saw her insult anyone. When she found problems, she solved them. When she was insulted, she answered with dignity. When she could have embarrassed people, She protected them instead. His voice softened. That isn't performance. That's character. Richard DeLuca slowly stood. Every conversation stopped again. The older man walked toward Emma. She wasn't sure what to expect. For most of the evening, he had been her harshest critic. He stopped in front of her. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Richard extended his hand. Not as a test, as an equal. I owe you an apology. Emma accepted his handshake. You don't owe me anything. Yes, I do. His voice carried across the ballroom. I mistook pedigree for wisdom. I won't make that mistake again. Several members of the DeLuca family quietly nodded. One after another, people who had whispered about Emma's appearance earlier now approached simply to thank her. For the advice, for the conversation, for reminding them what leadership looked like. No one mentioned her dress. No one mentioned her figure. No one questioned whether she belonged. The conversation had changed forever. Emma found herself standing beside the fireplace. The warmth against her hands contrasted sharply with the emotions inside her heart. She looked at Adrian. You shouldn't have done that. I only told the truth. Our agreement didn't require you to defend me. No, it didn't. She smiled sadly. Midnight is almost here. Adrian followed her gaze toward the grandfather clock standing against the far wall. 11:58. Only 2 minutes remained. The contract they had both signed was about to expire. Emma reached up slowly. The wedding ring felt heavier than it had that afternoon. Perhaps because it no longer represented a role. It represented a memory. A single evening that had changed both of them in ways neither had anticipated. She gently removed the ring from her finger. Adrian watched the movement without speaking. She placed the ring in his palm. Our agreement is complete. Her voice was soft. I'll always be grateful you trusted me. He closed his hand around the ring. She offered one final smile. Not forced, not broken, simply grateful. Then she turned toward the entrance. Behind her, the grandfather clock began to chime. 1, 2, 3. Each note echoed through the silent ballroom. By the 12th chime, the contract had officially ended. Emma took another step toward the door. She believed she was leaving exactly as she had promised. She never saw Adrian glance toward the fireplace. She never saw him reach inside his jacket, or remove the document that had begun this extraordinary evening. The same contract that had brought them together. Within seconds, he was about to decide whether that contract would remain a memory or become ashes. The 12th chime faded into silence. Emma reached for the bronze handle of the ballroom door. One more step, and the evening would become nothing more than a remarkable memory. Behind her, Adrian looked down at the folded contract resting in his hand. Only hours earlier, he had believed it represented certainty. Clear rules, clear expectations, no emotions, no complications. Now it felt like the smallest document in the room, because it no longer reflected the truth. He turned toward the fireplace. Without announcing his intentions, he walked across the ballroom. The guests instinctively moved aside. Emma heard the footsteps, but didn't look back. She assumed he was simply putting the paperwork away. Instead, Adrian stopped before the roaring fire. He unfolded the contract one final time. His eyes briefly scanned the signatures at the bottom of the page. Emma Brooks, Adrian DeLuca, two strangers who had promised to remain strangers. He smiled sadly. What an impossible promise. With one calm motion, he released the document into the flames. The paper curled almost instantly. Ink darkened. Edges blackened. Within seconds, the agreement that had defined their relationship disappeared into glowing ash. A collective gasp swept through the ballroom. Emma turned. Her eyes widened. What are you doing? Adrian didn't answer immediately. He watched the last corner of the contract disappear beneath the fire. Only then did he walk back toward her. Every guest stood frozen. Richard lowered his head. Victor watched in thoughtful silence. Even Isabella seemed unable to comprehend what she was witnessing. Adrian stopped, only inches away from Emma. "The contract is gone." Emma looked from the fireplace back to him. "You didn't have to destroy it." "Yes, I did." She searched his face. "You always finish what you start." "I do. So why end it this way?" His answer came without hesitation. "Because that contract was written for two people who no longer exist." A tear slipped quietly down Emma's cheek. Neither of them seemed to notice. Adrian slowly opened his hand. Resting in his palm was the DeLuca family signet ring. For generations, it had symbolized legacy, power, responsibility. Tonight, it had come to symbolize something else: choice. He gently reached for Emma's hand. Her fingers trembled. Not from fear, from uncertainty. "This wasn't our agreement," she whispered. "I know. You promised we'd become strangers. I believed we would. You promised there would be no future. I believed that too." A faint smile touched his lips. "I've been wrong exactly twice tonight." Soft laughter, warm rather than amused, rippled through the room. Emma looked down. "I don't know what happens after tonight. Neither do I. I don't belong in your world." Adrian shook his head. "No, you changed my world." Very carefully. He slipped the ring back onto her finger. The same gesture the guests had witnessed in the opening moments of the evening. Except now. Everyone finally understood why. Adrian turned to face the ballroom. His voice was calm, steady, impossible to misunderstand. "Tonight, she came here pretending to be my wife." Silence answered him. He looked around the room, meeting every pair of eyes. My uncle believed only an old family name could carry this legacy. Richard bowed his head. My business partners believed influence could be inherited. Several investors quietly lowered their glasses. Others believed appearance revealed character. No one argued. Emma proved every one of us wrong. He paused. The strongest person in this room was the only one who never tried to prove she was. Another pause, long enough for every word to settle. "I invited Emma here because I needed someone to protect a business agreement." He smiled toward her. "Instead, she protected people's dignity. She protected this family's reputation. And without ever asking for recognition, she reminded me what leadership actually looks like." He took Emma's hand. Not as part of a performance, not because the contract required it, simply because it felt right. Then he spoke the words that would be remembered long after every business deal signed that night had been forgotten. "Tomorrow, I'll spend the rest of my life proving she never has to pretend again." For a heartbeat, no one moved. No one applauded. The silence carried too much meaning. Then Richard DeLuca stepped forward first. He began to clap. Slowly, deliberately. One pair of hands became 3. 3 became 10. Within moments, the entire ballroom rose to its feet. Not for Adrian. For Emma, the woman they had dismissed before she spoke. The woman they had tested at every opportunity. The woman who had answered arrogance with grace. Suspicion with honesty, and power with quiet wisdom. Across the room, Isabella watched the standing ovation through tear-filled eyes. She finally understood the one lesson she had spent years missing. Status could open doors. Beauty could command attention. Influence could shape decisions. But none of them could replace character. Character was the only thing capable of changing hearts. Without another word, she quietly left the ballroom. No one noticed. No one followed. For the first time in years, the evening was no longer about the woman everyone expected to become Mrs. DeLuca. It belonged to the woman who never asked for the title. Months later, journalists would write about the merger that reshaped an international business empire. Financial magazines would praise Adrian DeLuca's leadership. Analysts would study the negotiation that saved billions of dollars. None of those headlines captured what truly happened that evening. The greatest victory had never appeared in the contracts. It happened the moment a woman who had spent years being underestimated walked into a room determined not to be admired, only to be useful. She left with something far more valuable than wealth. She left knowing she had been seen for exactly who she was, not despite her kindness, not despite her quiet confidence, but because of them. And Adrian DeLuca, the man who had built his life believing every relationship should serve a strategic purpose, discovered that the most important decision he would ever make could never be negotiated. It could only be chosen. And on one unforgettable night in New York, he chose Emma Brooks, not as a solution, not as an alliance, not as a role to be played, but as the woman who had quietly redefined his future.